Thank you, Sigrun, for this too friendly presentation, introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today. Have have the opportunity to introduce a couple of ideas and join you in discussion later on. As Sigrun said, it's political economy. What I want to like to talk about here is structural shifts in contemporary political economy. Um, let let me simply start. Oh, it's always like that, you know. You have your check and everything works, and then it doesn't work any longer. What's going on here? Sorry. Here we go. Okay, so let me simply start with this one. So this is the world we grew up in. Markets have been driving globalization for the last 50, 60, 70 years. Since the Second World War, we have entered a staggered period of globalization, which was made possible by a really dramatic decrease in the transaction costs of international trade or international cooperation. Yeah, that had something to do with that the institutions of global trade, of global economic interactions have become more similar between these various countries, the various economies, that we have completely new forms of transportation, of communication. We have agreed on English as our lingua franca. So exchange has become super easy in the last couple of decades. So you see here, this is the start of the, can you see this? Yeah. This is the start of the Industrial Revolution, and then, wow, we just go down to, by now, really negligible costs of international exchange of goods. Yeah? Transporting goods by sea between these various continents is by now super cheap. I mean, my best example is always, it used to be cheaper to have champignons put into a container, ship the container to East Asia and bring it back to Europe. That was cheaper than renting a cave and have the champignons growing up there, you know? So it's really amazing what has happened in the last couple of decades. And that has allowed for us all to set up completely new systems of economic exchange, of trade. By now, a product you are buying is no longer produced by one country or by one company. It's usually produced in very small fragments across the world. If you go into the machinery which is producing chips, there you have at least 1,200 separate stages of production, and these are happening across the world. Yeah, so we are living in a globalized world, and we all have taken that for granted, that this is the natural state of affairs. At least I did that, and I thought everything would go on like that. And by now I'm waking up in the morning and I think, no, it's no longer true. Yeah, we have been talking about global value chains and the global system is one unified economy. No, certainly not. Yeah, but I'll come to that in a minute. So here we go, ever higher differentiation of labor, and not to forget, that has been something which has been poverty alleviating across the world. Yeah, everybody has been profiting in general, and especially the less developed economies have been profiting. They have been able to close the gap, the developmental gap between the leading industrial economies and the global south. So we have seen a massive neutralization of income gaps in general. Okay, I'm not talking about a Mr. Musk who's got by now $1 billion and doesn't know what he wants to do with that. But the masses, yeah, 老百姓, have come closer together. Yeah, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So globalization has been a very positive trend since the Second World War. And it would have been nice if this would have continued in the remainder of the century. Unfortunately, I fear this is not going to happen, because we do have endogenous forces of change which have triggered the demise of the whole system. So markets have been so successful that they have triggered their own demise. Yeah. So that's my leading thesis here, and I'll try to explain what my idea is behind that. Let's have a look at the strategic foundations of economic cooperation between China, United States, EU, the key players in the period 1978 to 2012. You see what these key dates are. Of course, 78 is reducing utility levels for everybody. And there was a positive shadow of the future. That means it was not just happening now, but people expected that to be the case in the future as well. So people continue to cooperate because that was in the best interest of everybody. Yeah. Look at the West. I mean, especially Germany. Germany was profiting immensely from China's integration into the global system. We got cheap access to cheap intermediate products. We've been selling our machinery. I mean, the Chinese reform movement was running on German machinery, and once the Chinese economy was large enough, we were also selling our consumer goods. Yeah, so Germany was profiting the whole time, and had a pretty good time. Yeah, and then all that was, of course, made possible, was facilitated also by the idea of change by trade. We expected that China would converge towards our Western model. And of course, that was based on our German-Austrian ordnungspolitisches Denken, also Ordnungspolitik, institutional thinking, based on the idea that the Western model of market economy is the best out there. There's nothing better, nothing more efficient than this Western market-based system. And the idea was, well, let's introduce that to China. And the more intensive our cooperation is, the faster the Chinese will learn that our system is better, and they will converge. They will copy our system. And that was something which we expected to happen in the economic sphere. And it actually did happen. I mean, China by now is a market economy, a very special market economy, but it is one. Yeah. So, but the next step was that we thought, well, and once the Chinese economy is strong enough, and they start to have to move into innovation, research, and development by themselves, then they will also copy our social system, because our dogma was that innovation can work only in free societies. You need free societies in order to get this creativity and to get strong, innovative countries. So the idea was change by trade is something which will automatically bring China into our Western democratic realm. They will first take over they will first copy our market economy, and then they will copy our social systems, democracies, free liberal societies. Yeah, but well, if you believe in that, and people believed in it, business sector and politics, then you're of course willing to accept everything which is happening out there in terms of discrimination. If the Chinese are discriminating against our companies, if there's unfair trade, well, it doesn't matter. It's just a short period of time. Then the Chinese will have understood that our system is so much better, and everything will be fine. And after 20, 30 years, the Chinese will be part of our realm, and then we are no longer talking about anti-dumping subsidies or dumping and so on. Okay, so we thought that everything will end up fine. Might be a couple of hiccups at the beginning, Chinese stealing our technology, but in the end, everything will be okay. Yeah. Then the Iron Curtain was falling, and Fukuyama, I think he's not happy about this statement he made at that point in time. I mean, the paper he published was pretty differentiated, but has been quoted simply by end of history. So when the Iron Curtain fell, then Fukuyama put up the idea that perhaps that might be the end of history insofar as now the market economies and the democratic systems are in power, and they are so strong, they are so efficient, that there is no chance in how far any alternative systems could ever come and dominate our social systems. End of history. We are ending up in paradise, market economies, free democracies. Everything is fine. No chance that this might change. Well, okay, if you believe in that, what you do is you go all in. And that's what happened. Yeah, Europe, especially Europe, went all in. Yeah, we brought all our companies, we brought all our technology to China because there was no political risk. We had defined a global system in which political risk was simply not existing. Yeah, because of due to this logic, China would become part of us in the near future. Well, okay. And then there was something else, something very, very special and very China specific. There was also a prisoner's dilemma, an intrasystemic prisoner's dilemma amongst the Western societies or the Western economies. Well, there was this vision of China as a very large and, of course, dynamically growing market. And it was understood that leveraging China, the Chinese market, was a decisive factor for competition also in the home markets or in the rest of the world markets. Yeah, just imagine like that, or just think about that. Nearly all markets we do have are organized in oligopolies. That means we have only a small number of companies which are controlling the market. It's not what you learn in economics classes, that you have thousands of companies supplying any goods and millions of people asking to buy these goods. There you have no market power and everything is really controlled in this nice chart you have where you have scarcity reducing prices. With oligopolies, that's slightly different. If let's say you have 5 companies controlling a market, then these 5 companies are interdependent. If one of them is successful, then the others will have a problem. Yeah? If one of them is losing out, then the others will have a gain in revenue, in market shares, etc. So let's transfer that to the China play. So you have this super large, very quickly growing economy, and you have an oligopoly of, let's say, companies working in the what industry? Let's say computer industry. No. Let's take automotive. Okay. So you've got an automotive market globally controlled by 10 companies, and one of them is going to the Chinese market, and the other 9 are staying out. Yeah. So if you would be a CEO of one of these other 9 companies, well, what would be your reasoning? Well, it should be, okay, now I'm out of the Chinese market. My contender is now in the Chinese market. He's been investing 10 million euro. If this company is successful, then it will be able to get extra revenue out of the Chinese market, and it will be able to grow with the Chinese market. Okay, and as we expect this Chinese market to grow so fast, then that might have an impact on its global cost-benefit situation. Yeah, it might earn so much money that it's able to finance out of the China business research and development, market exploration in the rest of the world, and that might be something bad for me because I do not have this China-related financial flows. I do not have this revenue. Okay, therefore, actually, in order to neutralize this strategic bet, I should go to the Chinese market as well. If I go to the Chinese market and it doesn't work out, well, I lose 10 million euro. Doesn't matter. Peanuts. But if I let this company run free, then in 10, 20 years, the China leverage might become so large that I'm kicked out of the global market, that I lose my market share in the global system. Yeah. So you have these small oligopolies, and some of these companies go to China, they leverage China, and then all the others are more or less forced to go into the Chinese market as well in order to be part of this growth story. Because if they are not, they run the danger of being marginalized in 5-15 years. Okay? So, and that really led to a situation where oligopolies went more or less at the same time to China. Yeah, in a run of 3-4 years, all these major companies all went to China, and they were incentivized to transfer their technology much faster than they would otherwise. Okay, so China saw a massive inflow of technology, of capital, and a very much faster inflow of technology than it would have if it had not had this narrative of a super dynamically growing economy. Okay, I hope that that's become clear. So the idea here is that we have a prisoner's dilemma amongst Western companies, which due to their own dynamics were forced to enter China as quickly and as comprehensively as possible. Yeah? And that provided China with an extra developmental impulse. Yeah? So of course, this is not something which might happen with most other economies. Yeah? If you say you have now an African and Southern African Sub-Saharan African economy, and they are growing with 15% per year, can you do the same thing as China? No, because this small country doesn't have the leverage. You need to have a large economy which is growing fast. That is China. It's not even India. It's not even India. I think that is an idiosyncratic China characteristicum, nothing else. So these are the strategic foundations, and based on that, you have, in game theoretic terms, a very stable equilibrium where cooperation is the feature which is maximizing utility for all players involved, and that is stable. That is stable. Yeah? No incentive to defect from that. You're in this equilibrium. Now, as this goes on, year after year, we are living in this equilibrium, in this harmony game. Some quasi-parametric processes start to unwind. First of all, is catching up growth. Yeah, very substantial growth and developmental differential in the beginning. Yeah. But then China copies so much, learns so much from the rest of the world that it's very rapidly closing the purchasing power with the industrialized world. At the same time, there's a very fast acquisition of technological know-how, learning about business models and the rest, etc., etc. So the differential, or the gap, the developmental gap, which existed in the 1980s, had shrunk dramatically in the late 1990s, and it was hardly existing in 2012, 2013, 2014. And today, you all know where we are. So this catching up growth, which was the prime model by which China developed in the reform era, by simply copying templates from the West, had come to an end. China had learned so much that it was very similar to its teachers. And then, well, there was lacking convergence. This idea of change by trade, well, we learned eventually that didn't come about. This transfer of Western institutions, norms, and values was stopped prematurely from our point of view, as China learned that you can have some China flavor in there. You can have innovation without having a free society, a free civil system as we expected. Yeah. You can have a market economy with strong Chinese flavors. We now have a Chinese market economy where you have a very discretionary state. You have a market economy with a very strong state economy sector, and it's still working. It's still working. So our understanding that China would eventually converge to our system never happened. At some point in time, they simply took a left turn and established their own system. So our interaction with China is not intrasystemic, it remains intersystemic. So we have systemic rivalry, We have systemic competition in a form which we did not expect. The important thing is now that the China with which we are in competition right now is much, much more powerful, has much, much more capacity than the China with whom we started 50 years ago. And of course, and that is also something we must look at, there was insufficient social balancing in the Western world, especially in the United States. Very strong polarization of winners and losers of globalization in the Western world. While I think Germany and Europe have been doing quite well, it's especially the United States which was failing completely in that. If you look at the distribution of welfare created by globalization amongst US American income groups, then you will see that the lowest 80% income groups in the United States did not profit from globalization. It's been only the top 20 and especially top 5% of income earners in the United States which actually profited from globalization. The others did not. And that, of course, results in social discontent, that raises fears, that raises eventually, well, China-phobia, yeah, and the urge to change the system. So what you're seeing here is three major forces which have undermined our harmony game. Yeah, China was becoming stronger and stronger. Our idea of convergence never happened, and the social system, especially in the United States, was no longer accommodating the proactive integration of China into the system, because they thought, well, there is only one winner, that is China, and we are the loser. This win-win idea was kind of lost inside this lacking social balancing in the Western world and the United States. So what happens now is that the shadow of the future turns negative for the established industrialized world. They do not expect a further intensification of economic relations with China to increase their own welfare. Yeah. While in China, well, nothing like that. China still likes this model, okay? They're still happy with being integrated in the global system, having access to all these industrialized economy markets and learn a little bit more here and there. Yeah. So what we see is that the whole thing becomes asymmetric. While China would like to push forward with globalization, it has been profiting for 30, 40 years from the system, and there was no reason why they shouldn't try to go on with that. But for the Western world, the balance was shifting. Yeah, the expected gains were slowly overshadowed by increasing fears. Yeah, and the notion that we are losing out. Yeah, we are losing our technology. The Chinese companies are becoming stronger. We are losing jobs. Yeah, employment. We are losing welfare. So people started to reconsider the idea that integrating China into the global system is a good thing. They started to criticize that and work against it. So in game theoretic terms, we now have moved to an asymmetric game constellation, where the best response for China is to continue to cooperate, while the West moves to non-cooperation as their best strategic move. And that has actually become because the payoffs have changed. Yeah, the payoffs of non-cooperation have become larger for the Western world, while for China everything remains fine. So to China, cooperation remains the best response. For the United States, non-cooperation becomes the dominant strategy. Okay. So we are in this asymmetric constellation, and that started in the latter years of the 2000s. Actually, you have this first China shock debates in the United States directly after China's entry into to WTO. And that became stronger and stronger in the run of that decade. Yeah. And then comes the great financial crisis. You remember that one? That was subprime crisis, real estate crisis in the United States, Lehman crisis, which nearly brought the Western world to the brink of complete economic disaster. And then the Euro crisis in Europe, yeah, where the whole Western world was kind of in crisis for 10 years' time and was not really functioning the way it should. Yeah, that was 2008 and then continued for a couple of years. At that point in time, something changed in China. Those reformers, those liberal-minded people were saying, well, let's go for the Western templates. That's the best idea we can have. That's the best solution. That's the best institutional setting. Let's copy that. Let's make China as marketized, as westernized as possible, because that is our future. These people were suddenly marginalized because, well, their template was failing. The Western template was failing. And suddenly China arose as a savior of the global economy. I mean, the IMF and World Bank were lauding China for being such a strong force in this time of crisis and helping the world out of this mess. Yeah. So thinking changed in China, and they were looking for, well, what makes us so strong? What are Chinese idiosyncrasies? Where can we strengthen our China flavor in order to become resistant against these Western misdevelopments or failures, and establish our own future according to our own rules. Yeah? So people started to hesitate, become suspicious about this Western template. Okay, and well, and as a matter of fact, the Chinese system did have a massive state capacity. I mean, a lot of things didn't work out, but eventually state capacity was enormous. So very fast, very successful catching up. Disruptive advances in future technologies. Yeah, look where China is standing today in terms of AI, in terms of quantum computers, etc., etc. So they were pushing forward. In times of crisis, when Europe and the United States were dealing with the great financial crisis, China's innovation was pushing forward. They were gaining a couple of years in relative developments vis-a-vis the Western world. A disillusionment with the Western market templates, and rising perceptions in China of threats emanating from the Western style globalization. Okay, so this is when Xi Jinping comes up and talks about national security, and establishes a very broad notion of security. Everything becomes securitized. And it's actually the idea that for China, in order to remain Chinese and attain a leading role in the global system, it must defend itself against various threats resulting from agency by the United States or the Western world. So we have a new primacy of national security. The CPC changes its policy and reasserts its claim to full control and power. Yeah, in the reform era, the CPC was kind of happy with having the back seat, you know, having the back seat and controlling from behind, and having everybody working in the market environment. Give you one example: state-owned enterprises. One of the key reforms in the state-owned enterprise sector by Deng Xiaoping was that he said, okay, in the Maoist era, we had this double top in state-owned enterprises. One was the business-minded operations manager, and one was a party secretary. And eventually, it was always a party secretary who made the final decision. And then Deng Xiaoping said, no longer. He was degrading the party secretary, who did have only symbolic function eventually, while the operations CEO was all powerful. Yeah? So the party was actually just a symbol. And then came 2013, 2014, 2015, and Xi Jinping changed the whole thing. Now, state-owned enterprises are controlled, are led by the party secretaries. And these professional managers are actually of only secondary importance. So the whole thing changed again. Yeah, so we are back in the system which we know from the Maoist era, highly ideologized. And of course, now the primacy of all political work of CPC is to uphold CPC rule and control over the economy. While this idea of growth first, development first is no longer there. That was something for the 80s, 90s. It's no longer there. Now economic development is only of secondary or even tertiary importance in relation to security and control by the party. Yeah. Now, as China has also become much, much more powerful in terms of technology, in terms of the size of its economy, it has also the capacity to be much, much more self-assertive in the global system. So you have proactive agency in the global realm. Now it's fun far your way. Yeah, go out, show your strength, and try to influence the global structures in China's favor. Yeah, so we do see a projection of Chinese business interests, governance structures along the new Silk Road, the OBOR, One Belt, One Road, Belt and Road Initiative. We see something like a new change of trade, but this time in east-west direction. Look at what is happening right now between China and the global south. This is a little bit like the change by trade Europe, Germany was enacting in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Not the 70s, sorry, the 80s and 90s. Now China is playing the same role vis-a-vis the global South countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, etc., etc. It's promoting its own ideas of how to order society and economy, and it's backing these ideas with substantial financial means and real development assistance. So, and eventually we do see that China's economic agency becomes increasingly supplemented with diplomatic forays for the projection of political influence, soft power, geostrategic military interests. If you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, you see a lot of these industrial hubs which have been established come along with a massive strengthening of military bases of China in the rest of the world as well. So China is playing a very interesting strategy where it uses the capacity, the strength it had gained before in order to project its own ideas to the rest of the world. Oops. Okay, so now you can imagine we have ended up in a new system. The game theoretic system has changed. We are now in a prisoner's dilemma. Non-cooperation is the best strategy for all players. Non-cooperation is a utility maximizing strategy for the West and for China, and unfortunately, this is a stable system. As the payoffs have changed for both players, now we are in a stable system of non-cooperation. And actually, I don't see us coming out of that and moving back into the cooperation system we did have before. We are stuck in the system which is controlled by security interests, by bilateral suspicion and fear. So what we have seen is that quasi-parametric shifts have established a new stable national equilibrium. And the point I wanted to make here is that's been endogenous. It's not some exogenous shock. It's been an endogenous development. Markets have been working so well. The incentives which we have set up have been working so well, have increased welfare, technological upgrading so quickly, so comprehensively, that eventually the framework changed as well. And in this new framework, there's unfortunately very little space for win-win any longer. and we are in a new situation. And if you look at the empirical data, then you see that global economic structures are really adjusting. This is a tool developed by McKinsey and their think tank, MGI, McKinsey Global Institute. What they've done is pretty nice. What you're seeing here on the horizontal axis is geographic distance. Yeah, this is the further you go to the right, the further the geographic distance. And here you see geopolitical distance. So here it's very close, here it's very far apart. What they have done is actually they have been looking at the voting behavior of nations at the United Nations. Okay, so if in all major voting decisions made at the United Nations, two countries have voted in the same way, yeah, out of 10 votes, yeah, they have voted 10 times in the same way, yes, yeah. Then you have here, this is the United States and Canada. Well, in the period 2017-24, no, this is actually the last 25 years, they have voted most of the time in the same direction. Yeah, if the United States voted yes, Canada was voting yes as well. When Canada was voting no, the United States was voting no as well. So here we go. But then you compare China with the United States, you see this is quite some substantial geopolitical distance. United States and China have in most cases voted differently. When China said yes, the United States was saying no. So this, in geopolitical terms, these two countries were pushing for different goals. They did have different norms, values, mindsets, visions of the future. Okay, so quite some substantial difference there. Okay, and then you see at the same time that there has been very substantial trade between China and the United States. But between 2017 and 24, the United States has massively reduced its trade with China. Yeah, and and this is pre-Trump too. Yeah, since then, China-United States trade has gone down even further. So what we're seeing here is that the United States in general have tried to reduce the geopolitical distance of their trade relations. Okay, rather trade with players who are more similar than us. And you see this even nicer with China. And China was decoupling from the Western world, and especially the United States, even before Trump too. Yeah, you see here, yeah, geopolitical distance quite substantial, and therefore they're also reducing the trade relationships with the Western world. At the same time, they're increasing their trade relationships, their trade interdependency with countries, with nations which share their norms and values, which share their voting behavior in the United Nations. You see here, Middle East, Central Asia, Africa, ASEAN, Southeast Asia, and Russia. Yeah, here you see these increase in trade relations, yeah, with economies which have less geopolitical distance with China. So, and I think I've got a third one here. This is Germany. Well, okay, we are in the process of reducing our trade relations with Russia. Of course we do. But if you look at some de-risking, decoupling from China, no, you don't see that actually. That's quite interesting. A lot of talk, but very little action, very little agency in Germany. De-risking, decoupling from China is not actually happening. Yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to say here is that especially in the case of China, we see that early on, China has been decoupling, has been de-risking from the rest of the world. And that is, of course, also a step to securitize their system and their model of social and economic development. I think that's super interesting. Super interesting. We are talking about de-risking from China, but actually it's China de-risking from us. Yeah? And they make it very consequential. and with some tangible results. And of course, that goes along with the evolution of new economic networks, which are by now actually crowding out the United States. This is how China is establishing itself in the Pacific and Southeast Asian region. You see, there was this Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trump left that in the first 3 weeks of his first presidency. Since then, the United States is out, has gone, has left, and China is pushing forward. China is part now of RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Trade Partnership, which gives China access actually to the ASEAN group and provides with network effects to the CPTPP, this new Asia-Pacific network. So pushing the United States out, establishing China as a major player in this system. BRICS Plus, same story. China is setting up kind of an alternative global integration area where it's not dependent on the United States, where it can project its own ideas, its own institutions, its own norms and values. And that's becoming stronger by the day, and is an emanation, a manifestation of this new self-assertiveness of China, and actually the failure of our Western idea of change by trade. China is recovering everything we have tried to set up since the Second World War now. So what is the world we are going to live in now? Actually, we are living in a world where markets are now giving way to economic statecraft. Before I explain the term economic statecraft, here my key thesis there, and that is that we are in the middle of a regime transition. We are moving away from a neoclassical paradigm in which economic interaction, trade, specialization had been understood as welfare enhancing and conflict preventing. I mean, you find a lot of negative talk about neoclassical economics, etc. Tell you, it's been the best we've had in the last couple of decades. Neoclassical economic development paradigm, with all its faults, was quite productive and was poverty reducing in the global average. So we are leaving this neoclassical paradigm where we thought economic interaction is providing the basis, providing the foundation for win-win cooperation. We are leaving that, and we are moving towards a paradigm of securitized geoeconomics. And in this securitized geoeconomics, now international economic exchange is now seen with suspicion, and it's understood as actually dangerous and prone to be weaponized. I mean, look at the media, look at the Handelsblatt, look at some proclamations from our government, EU level or German level, and you will see that people say, hey, all our companies, they should reduce their China engagement, they should be careful with their tech exposure, etc., etc. So now we are talking about something where an intensification of global exchange, an intensification of knowledge exchange is seen as something that might be dangerous, where we might be blackmailed. And actually we are being blackmailed. Look at China playing the rare earth card. I mean, they are blackmailing our companies, our economies. They certainly do that. But this has by now become the default position. Whatever you do, the first thing you should consider, can this be used against you? And of course, this is dramatically reducing the intensity of our global exchange. So now I'm just reading the sentence. Now, the quest for ever higher levels of economic welfare amongst nations sharing a minimum of shared values, our win-win paradigm, is becoming subordinated to the primacy of national security. And that is happening in a world which is characterized by deep-rooted suspicion, and incompatible adversarial value sets and national core interests. So we are now in the middle of a zero-sum logic. Yeah. And by the way, think about it. This is actually not only happening with Germany and China. Same thing is right now happening also with Germany and the United States. Yeah. This is happening right now. So it's a comprehensive regime change where we are giving up our naive or whatever, but well or the positively minded idea to go for cooperation and go into a paradigm where cooperation is certainly understood as naive and stupid, and where you should rather defend yourself and don't share anything with anybody, because whatever you share, whatever you give away might be used against you the next minute. Okay, so that's where we're trapped. That's where we're trapped right now. Here comes economic statecraft to the fore, and economic statecraft is simply something you are seeing all the time by now. It's where you use economic levers in order to attain political goals. So it's different from industrial politics or economic politics or policies, where you try to change industry, or you have political impulses to industry by which you want to change industry to make industry more efficient, to push industry in a certain development trajectory or something like that. All fine. So that's intrasystemic. Economic statecraft means something else. Here, the state intervenes in the economy, intervenes in the development of an industry, not in order to change the industry or the economy, but to send a political signal to somebody out there. Yeah. So this is where you use the economy in order to attain goals of a higher order, usually national interest, security, etc., etc. It's not meant in order to improve economic structures, business performance, or anything else. No, here we are going towards higher goals, which are defined in the sphere of interstate relations. Yeah. So this is happening right now. Yeah. And all CEOs, all decision makers we have in our companies worldwide will have to think about that. It's no longer about maximizing cost-benefit structures. It's no longer about maximizing the dynamics of your innovation regime. It's about how does your business model, how does your business development plan fit into the overall geopolitical system. Yeah? And that changes everything, actually. That changes everything. And is, in my understanding, now the key parameter of how we should organize our economic relations with China, and how Chinese enterprises are actually already organizing their interaction patterns with us. Yeah. If you look how Chinese enterprises are interacting with our economies, how they invest, how they organize their value chains, you see it's 50% business, but the dominating argument calculus is always a geopolitical one, and they have to. Look at what has happened to the Chinese tech tech oligarchs like Jack Ma, etc., etc. They have all been disciplined by the party and follow now a political script. It's no longer a purely business script. It's a political script. Okay, and then time is advanced already. I just wanted to say there is a typology of economic statecraft. You can use it offensively. You can use it defensively. It comes up in many manifestations, and if you go through the Handelsblatt for the last 6 months, you can have dozens of individual examples how this becomes manifest in the real world today. So what is the impact on welfare, innovation dynamics, social income, equality, etc.? Well, you will see economic statecraft in this geopoliticized new economic regime which we have in the global system is, of course, dramatically increasing the transaction cost of economic exchange. Okay, and if you have higher transaction cost, then certain transactions are eventually no longer profitable and you don't do them. Okay, so the intensity of economic exchange becomes lower, and that reduces, of course, economic welfare. At the same time, you have a fragmentation of markets. If you're not willing to cooperate, to share your ideas with others, then markets become smaller, results in a loss of efficiency. Markets become less profitable. Utility and welfare cannot be achieved as in the past. At the same time, if you restrict cross-border trade, then the rents of comparative advantage are no longer available. Yeah. So once again, utility levels, welfare are being reduced. It prohibits the free flow of business models, technology, ideas. So all these synergies which were possible in the past, which allowed us to have very, very fast innovation trajectories, are no longer possible. It simply doesn't work any longer. We are reducing ourselves to islands on which everybody is working a little bit by himself, but we do not exchange ideas, at least not in the way we used to. Of course, it reduces the reliability of business expectation. That reduces investment behavior. Entrepreneurship becomes more difficult. A lot of good ideas will never make it to the market. And of course, it also reduces global equity. Yeah. So the global wealth and income opportunities are becoming more unequal. Some will gain, most will not. Okay. So the whole world is changing, and inside this new regime, the Western world and China are trying to position themselves. Okay. And everything you're seeing and reading and learning about China, what is happening in China right now, follows this new logic. China follows this new logic. Yeah, it tries to save as much as possible from the old globalization pattern, but otherwise it's since a couple of years already, and I would say since at least 2015, that's when we've seen the first of these development. China is on a defensive developmental trajectory, preparing itself for friction, preparing itself for a more adversarial global environment. As you can see from dual circulation theory model, as you see from the 3 times 10 years plans made in China 2025, 2034, 35 and 45, yeah, and the unpublished latest science and technology plan, yeah, it follows all this same logic, yeah, and I think we must understand that in order to understand what is happening in China, and in order to understand how we could maximize the promotion of our own interests in this changing regime. And key point here is forget about the old-fashioned globalization that's gone. We won't be able to get back to that in the next 20, 30 years. We are in a new regime. Accept it, live with it, and try to make the best out of that. And I personally fight for the idea to have communication as strong as possible, exchange as much as intense as possible with China, because I still do believe in the power of communication, of exchanging ideas. That's a much better way to get along and to live well in this global system. Thank you very much. That's from my side.